This video was honestly a long time in the coming, and recently the conversation sparked back up on Twitter, especially from an IGN article about zombies that came out. But today, we're discussing the current state of Easter eggs, mostly focusing on Cold War zombies. First, I want to talk about a realization that we made a few weeks ago back on Twitter as well. That is, if you look at Call of Duty as a whole, back whenever at least zombies began to win the war, at the time, multiplayer was the casual experience and zombies was for more the hardcore crowd, right? But as time has gone along and everything, I think it's very fair to say that nowadays, multiplayer is for the hardcore people and zombies has become the casual experience for a lot. Is that necessarily a bad thing, at least for zombies? No, because it does allow more players into the experience to get their hands on it and enjoy it. However, it is definitely overcompensating, and now the players who put the most time into the game are being left out instead. So, we have gone from one extreme to the complete opposite. So what can be done to compromise? Well, first, we need to figure out what Easter eggs are, or should I be saying, what type of experience should you do an Easter egg for? This is where we have to start, because for many people, there are many different answers. Primarily, however, I think there are two answers you'd hear people say the most. It would be for like an endgame experience or more of a story experience. Now, what is the definition I'd play for each of these? For endgame, I relate that to something from like a raid from Destiny or World of Warcraft, something that takes your knowledge of the base game and you apply it to more of a puzzle situation to add another layer of difficulty above everything else going on. For the story experience, I define that, well, as it implies, if you're gonna go play an Easter egg, you're doing it more as like a campaign mission purely for the story or the lore enjoyment. Now, starting back from Ascension and Black Ops 1, all the way through, I would say, Frozen Dawn and World War II, I think it's fair to say that from a gameplay perspective, it was weighted more towards an endgame experience over more of a storytelling experience. Now, obviously, there are exceptions throughout that timeline. This is just kind of doing it as a perspective glance throughout that entire time span. The difficulty of these eggs throughout this time is what ended up making them so appealing. It's what drove players to want to complete something that was deemed difficult, which made popularity for it skyrocket amongst the community. It was a new type of challenge for players to go out and do. Now, to be fair, throughout this time as well, though often you'd see the mistake of something being deemed difficult when it was actually more of a, what the fuck, this makes no sense, or basically artificial difficulty, and we're looking at you right now, Revelation Rockstep. Moving into BO4, however, was when a shift started to begin, and it was most noticeable if you looked at the two different storylines within this title. You had the Chaos maps, which were much more endgame focused over trying to tell a story, and then all the Ether maps were much more focused on telling the story over gameplay mechanics. Now we move into Cold War zombies, and it's more of a mix. It uses the story narrative to set up directly the gameplay decisions, and things aren't just completely random anymore. Once again, looking at your Revelations. I want to introduce this quote now from Corculum Cool, the creative director of Zombies, that he gave to IGN in this article. I'll have it linked down below if you want to read the entire thing yourself. However, they go on to state how previously, less than 2% of players were completing Easter eggs unless they were using a guide from YouTube, and they wanted to change that narrative. Treyarch, and I quote, definitely made it a priority to make Easter eggs less obscure and make sure the steps make sense with the narrative. They're still challenging, but they're not crazy hard like they used to be. This is a great mindset to have, honestly. However, we now need to introduce another thing into this conversation that does also affect a map's Easter egg, and that is the hunt. As much as the world's first race is purely a social media event that does help in the hype of new content releases, how any player is able to solve an Easter egg for the first time is arguably the biggest impact on whether that player will enjoy it, since, to be fair, most players will only complete it once and then never touch it again. At this current place in time, however, neither the hunt nor the eggs themselves are challenging in even the slightest. Now, I recognize that I am an above average player, and a challenge for me is way above what most people would find difficult. However, currently these eggs are nothing more than a campaign mission on normal difficulty over an endgame feeling activity like how they've been in the past previous years. And I think this is where you have a lot of disgruntlement amongst people currently. Before we dive into this anymore, there is one more important thing to talk about, and it's a truth that you're not going to hear a lot of people admit to, and that's the fact that Easter eggs have always been super easy. Now, there's a caveat to that. Easter eggs are always super easy when you go to replay them. The only real challenge for an Easter egg is the very first time you complete it and you put all the puzzle pieces together. That is why the hunt in World's First Race, the perceptions that get set from those, is so important. Because of that, lots of this conversation, especially in regards to Easter eggs, is going to be focusing on the player's first encounter with a puzzle and the first encounter of completing something, and what we can do to make this better for everyone to have every type of experience as possible. So what exactly needs to change? What needs to happen to please not only the average casual player, but still appeal to that hardcore community that wants that extra challenge? First, we need to make a list of things that we'll call it a rule guide, things that should be prioritized based off what we learned from the IGN article and also from my own personal experiences. Rule 1, the player's first completion is the most important. Rule 2, players should be able to solve without using any YouTube guide. Rule 3, players should have to use puzzle solving skills to progress through steps. Rule 4, all things within the egg should make sense and have logical connections between them. Rule 5, a higher degree of difficulty should be felt over the base survival experience. And Rule 6, rewards should be given equivalent to the challenge given. With that as our rule guide, so to say, let's start a dissection of a few things. First, we're going to look at the in-game character quotes. This system is great for helping players know what is happening within the map's story progression and lore, and also for acknowledging that a player has succeeded or failed at doing something as well. However, that needs to be the absolute extent of it. Currently, quotes are telling players, go here, look for this exact thing out, or, oh, you have that item, I bet you can use that here. While that does satisfy Rule 2 of our guide, Rules 3 and 5 are horrendously broken at the same exact time. We'll first go into tear apart the RayK84 build quest. The first example of this happening is whenever you pick up the weapon blueprint. When you pick it up, Ravenov gives you this quote.
If you are to find missing parts for Coolclay's weapon, you will first need something from him. His body must be around here somewhere.
Now this quote would have been fine if it stops right after the first sentence, but the fact that they had Ravenov go forward and be like, oh, you're specifically looking for his body is where the issue comes in lie. Yes, this is a minor one to be fair, but let the player make the logical conclusion that that is what we need to go find. We know that we're looking for Coolclay and there's something from him that we need. The next example to show is what happens with the key for the lockers after you put the eye on the computer. Us gaining that key should be clue enough for us to look for something that it can unlock. However, when you walk remotely close to the locker area, you get this quote.
The key you found. It must match one of these lockers.
Now first, we weren't even in the building yet and the game was already telling us we're in the right area for this key to use. Like, that key is called the locker key, so we already know we should be looking for lockers. Just let the player look for them and then walk up to them themselves to see if they can open. There's no reason for the game to hold your hand this much. And finally, for the RayK quest, I want to do what's showing on the screen right now, and that is the PC showing the dartboard layout. This part of this Easter egg quest was done phenomenally and is an example of how all the quest steps should be. We interact with the computer and they let the player make the logical conclusion that what is being shown on the screen is the same layout as the dartboard, and we connect it together as such. Letting us as the player solve all of this with no help makes us feel like we're actually accomplishing it and not just being guided through it. We're now going to be jumping ship and going and focusing on the main quest itself. Firstly, the main quest is filled with the come see me go here quotes instead of just signifying, hey, you finished this step, now let's imply what could happen next and let you figure it out yourself. Especially in Cold War Zombies, the game trains you to really listen to these quotes, but as a result, it can also mislead you. And a great example with this is during the mimic step itself. If you get the 2 data codes before getting Sam's tracker ID, it tells you this.
That
By telling the player this, it implies that they are good and they're finished, although Peck told us 3 different names. So now, if you go and collect all of the 3 things that you do need, the game tells you this quote.
Nice work. Let's get the mainframe rebooted.
Now this might just be a slight oversight of this map and the audio design and the line writing for this Easter egg, but if you can't reboot the mainframe until you have 3 out of 3 things, don't tell the player when they have 2 out of 3 things that they can go reboot the mainframe as well. One more thing to touch on with this mimic step, and very similarly to with the Reiki thing, it does do something phenomenally well within it as well. Whenever you have to go play Pokemon and capture the right mimics, it lets the player figure out exactly what they need to do through trial and error in this step. It doesn't have an audio quote that tells you, oh, these guys are actually mimics and you have to capture them in specific locations. It lets the player trial and error this until they figure out the proper methods. This is how steps should be solved. Puzzle solving, logic, and all of that together. On top of all that as well, the step only gives you audio cues if you did it right or if you did it wrong. It says, yes, you have one of the 3 items you need, or wrong, try again. An example of what is bad in this situation is, I don't have a specific recording of it, but I know it happens for 100%, is whenever you're doing the teleporting canister. If you don't catch it in time, eventually the map specific character of Gray, Carver, or Strauss, whoever you have for that game, will come on and say, oh, maybe you should try slowing it down some way. Why not just let the player think of that? Why not let the player logically keep trial and erroring and figure out what to do without the game having to come save the day? Now, the last big point I want to talk about before we get into what I think are possible solutions that could help the Easter egg situation of Cold War is the conversation of rewards. Currently, they just don't exist, especially now that we have multiple forms of these new crystals for us to be going to earn for bigger and better upgrades for all of our things. These crystals are supposed to be attached for a higher skilled tier to be unlocked by higher skilled players, or whatever you want to phrase it. Why is not at least earning one of the top tier crystal a reward for completing an Easter egg quest? When the game is telling us through its own reward system that doing an Easter egg quest is not worth the highest skill reward, I think that shows enough about it right there. And to be fair, Treyarch has always lacked in the Easter egg reward department. Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward, they got it down pretty good, to be honest, but Treyarch has always lacked in this area. Now we can finally get to the bread and butter of this whole video. What are my suggestions to how Easter eggs should change so that way both sides of the coin are happy for both the casual players and hardcores? The first aspect to look at in regards for all of my changes is the world first race itself. And that change is DLC maps should not have a delayed egg start period. Part of Easter egg hunting is map knowledge, and learning the layout and using a race format as an example. Those who are able to learn a map layout faster should benefit from that more, especially in a race scenario. Now, this handicap in a race environment is basically like going out and telling Michael Jordan back in his heyday that he had to go wear concrete shoes in the first quarter so that way the other team actually had a chance. That doesn't make any sense, right? Why would you want that? As a result of, if you want the Easter egg to launch at the same time as the map, you need to have the DLCs be preloadable. Doesn't make any sense, honestly, why it doesn't happen, period. Now, yes, that can open the floodgates for data mining, but sadly at this point, especially because of the popularity that people gain through posting information they shouldn't have, and because of the views and monies that they make that off of it, it's not going to stop anytime soon. So the hunt should be done in the best way possible for a true fair start for as many as possible, which means preloading should happen. Next is probably the biggest topic we talked about earlier, and that's about the hand-holding that the game gives us through the character quotes. Let the players use their own brain power to solve things and not guide us around like lost puppies. The simple solution is just not to put any quotes like that into the game. Now, going off of this though, there is a potential middle ground as well to have the best of both worlds. For this, we're going to use Destiny 2 as an example. You can make the first 24 hours that an Easter egg is available be different. So within the first 24 hours that a Destiny raid is available, they make it so that experience is harder than anything ever outside of the first 24 hours. They lower your light level or your power level, and if you can successfully complete the raid within these 24 hours, you then get a calling card or an emblem, and you can wear it as a badge of honor, saying that you completed something very difficult. And that emblem as well is only earnable throughout that specific time period. For a zombie situation like this, what you could do is remove all the handhold quotes throughout the first 24 hours that an Easter egg becomes available. For all players or teams that can beat the Easter egg within that first 24 hours, you give them something exclusive like a weapon blueprint, an emblem, a calling card, an operator, something of the sorts that they can wear as a badge of honor. And then once the 24 hours is over, all the handhold quotes get reactivated in the game. So that way, people who do need that extreme guided help can still get it. Now this accomplishes a few things by doing this. A, it gives the hardcore community that harder challenge that they're trying to find from an endgame activity. Remember, as I stated earlier, the hardest time you will ever have completing an Easter egg is the very first time. So why not double down on that, so then that way, if you want to make it easy mode for everyone else later, the hardcore community can still be satisfied. B, it gives everyone a reason to participate for chasing that exclusive badge of honor reward, and it takes away a little bit of that toxicity that surrounds the world's first race being the only thing that matters. It also will then encourage players to go back and help out others if the Easter egg does get beaten within the first 24 hours, so as many people as possible can have this exclusive reward. And C, and lastly, it allows casuals and everybody to still solve the egg on their own without the use of any guide, and even if they don't pick up the game until many months after a specific egg releases, because after that first 24-hour window, all the hand-holding stuff does get placed back into the game, so that way there is no excuse for no one to be able to not solve it. Lastly, there is one other world first hunt aspect we need to talk about, and that's the incredible levels of toxicity behind it. It has continued to grow with no signs of change. Everybody recognizes it, but instead, nothing is done to try and quell it, and let's be honest, it's because it brings in the views. And yes, this is me calling everybody out. We all say it's a race, but how can it be classified even as a competition? People do hunt on stream, and while it's not bad to get help from the community whatsoever, those with more viewers will have an advantage over others as a result, since they can have more ideas thrown at them to try out over someone who is thinking all on their own. So it becomes less of one person's hunting skill versus another, which goes completely against the concept of a competition. So what's a potential fix for this? Here's my suggestion. You have the top community members come together and form their own competition purely against each other. Everyone that bids into this agrees to ignore all social media, chat, tips, donations, completely cut all ties and communication from the outside world. Make it a true race against each other for content's sake and bragging rights. Heck, maybe if even someone from Activision sees this, they themselves could get content creators together for this and make it a charity event for the COD Endowment Fund or even another organization. Doing all this way, so that way the community can still have the sport and competition of the race, and their favorite creators can still have bragging rights on the line, while everybody else can go hunt about themselves at their own pace, and the community can have its own true first to whoever solves it first. Now, will this ever happen realistically? Probably not, because, be honest, many creators do not want to sacrifice the increased revenue that we make during new content drops for the better the community and to have less toxicity. But maybe I'll be surprised and maybe everybody will come together for something like this. However, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up here now because it's lasted a lot longer than I anticipated, and I hope that I didn't forget anything and covered all the points that I wanted. So rough TLDR is there just needs to be a lot less hand holding. The Easter egg steps themselves are okay, especially within Firebase Z, but from the hunting aspect, they need to stop holding our hand, and they need to make it to where it's just a more natural hunt experience and not segmented in a way. So I hope y'all enjoyed the video. I hope somebody learned something from it. Hope it sparks some interesting conversation amongst people. And until the next time I see you, remember to make the smart decisions.